Well, hello, everyone. We're really pleased to be here today, and thanks everybody for coming. Our speakers today are Larry Iveson. Larry is a PBLA lead teacher and has been a PBLA regional coach with the Center for Canadian Language Benchmarks since 2013. Then Sepideh Alavi is a content developer, trainer, and online mentor with New Language Solutions. And my name is Marijke Geurts. I also work with New Language Solutions as an online content developer, TBLV coordinator, and Learn IT to Teach Avenue trainer. And I also want to give a shout out to Paul Carter, who's our moderator today. If you have any questions, please add them to the chat, and please also add the slide number, which you can see in the bottom right corner. And Paul will collect the questions for our Q&A at the end. As I said, this session will be recorded and posted on YouTube afterwards, and the session slides will be added as a PDF file to the Avenue Teacher Forum, where we posted in the discussion. So in this workshop, we will review the backwards planning process that was used to create these modules using the CCLB module planning template. We will introduce the new CLB 5.6 module, preparing to attend a workplace event. And we will also do a quick walkthrough of the recent module at CLB 7.8, arranging a workplace event. The two modules can be found on Avenue Learn IT to Teach, where you can preview them under the PBLA sample modules. Each module is broken down into two sections, for teachers and for students. Whether you're developing your own module or checking out an already developed module, the first step is to take a look at the heart of the module in the module plan. The module plan can be downloaded as just the module plan or as part of the full module package, which includes teacher notes and student handouts. Once opened, you can move along to the module plan pages. Larry, could you tell us a bit more about how to get started with module planning?
Once I unmute, I can do lots of talking here. Thanks, Marijke. Yeah, so as with all PBLA planning, work starts with the needs assessments of your students, such as this stage 2 example here. The real world tasks identified on the student needs assessment are the starting point and the essential elements of module planning in PBLA. However, needs assessments lead towards a thematic approach to longer range planning, while real world tasks sort of lead towards individual one-off assessment tasks. So all the talk about modules, what is a module? It is a short to medium-term unit of instruction focused on a specific topic within a theme that incorporates a number of lessons and interrelated language tasks. The theme for the set of modules being developed on Avenue is Workplace Meetings in the Digital Age. And you can see that there is a difference between the two modules we're looking at today and the topics. 5.6, preparing to attend a workplace event, and at 7.8, arranging a workplace event. The topic is both modules is similar, but the task outcomes are different. Note that the module topic here, module topics here are in a form of an action statement using a gerund. So why teach at the module level? Well, planning at the module level can bring needs assessments and specific world task goals together, especially when used in conjunction with a theme-specific needs assessment. A real-world task is seldom in isolation. Other real-world tasks need to precede or follow it in order for the task to be doable in the real world. In this way, modules reflect real-world language events. Similarly, important events relevant to those real-world language tasks can be put into the teaching and learning. Modules also provide multiple opportunities for learners to use and practice new language across skill areas. Modules also ensure that language tasks are related to a range of classroom activities and become an integral part of the instructional process. Modules also keep the learning directed, allowing students sufficient practice to achieve real-world task goals within a reasonable timeline and without pursuing thematic topics and skill-building activities that are unrelated to the student's goals or needs. In today's presentation, we'd like to take you through the process that was used to plan these modules using the CCLB module template. The template includes rules for real-world task goals, for context and background, for CLB descriptors, for language items, for language and learning strategies, and assessment tasks. Plus, there are individual columns for each of the 4 skills. So why use the module template? Well, you can use a module planning format that works for you. The CCLB module template provides a blueprint of what needs to be taught and assessed. It supports a process of backward planning and examination using the Canadian Language Benchmark document. It supports instructional and assessment reliability through alignment to the Canadian Language Benchmarks. It ensures that assessment is an integrated part of the instruction process and ensures that critical aspects of communication are not overlooked. And finally, for those that are used to the template, it is a predictable and standardized format through which to view the module and the module development process. The module template starts with real-world task goals. Real-world task goals are the real-world use of language to accomplish a specific communicative purpose in a particular context. Sometimes we call this also a language event or a communication event. A good brainstorming session here can help to flesh out related real-world task goals. At the beginning of the module template, they are goals because as we proceed down the backwards planning of the template, the critical elements of the task are exposed and the final classroom doable real-world tasks emerge. As the final mix of tasks appear, there may not always be real-world task goals for all 4 skills. Additionally, as the modules build skills and knowledge through the unit, modules do suggest their own sequence of learning and progression. This sequence does not always follow the listening, speaking, reading, and writing order of the module template. Also, tasks can build towards one culminating task for the module. So now let's take a closer look at the real-world task goals for each of the modules in today's session. Marijke?
Yes. Thanks for explaining, Larry, what the purpose of the real-world task goals is. When we were brainstorming the real-world task goal for CLB 5.6, we also looked at the CLB sample tasks to make sure that the tasks in this module would be on par. And we thought about what the steps are usually leading up to attending a workplace event. Most of the time, the first thing to happen is that one receives an email with an invitation. So we made reading the first skill to be covered in this module. And the real-world task goal is understand an email containing an invitation to an event with descriptions of workshops offered at the event. And the visual here is part of the reading from the skill using task. After receiving an invitation, one should reply by accepting or declining. So that makes writing the second task. So the real-world task goal is accept and decline work-related invitations by writing a formal reply. We chose to include accepting or declining an invitation verbally as well, since speaking on the phone is more challenging than writing an email. So speaking is the culminating task in the module. And we formulated the real-world task as making a phone call to a colleague to discuss the invitation to an event and to accept or give regrets. However, we also included listening to voicemail messages at the end of the module because sometimes appointments are rescheduled, things can come up, and one can go to an event after all. The final real-world task in this module is understand a series of short phone messages confirming, changing, or requesting to attend a meeting at a specific time or place. Sepideh, what are the real-world task goals for 7-8?
Right, so for 7-8, the topic was arranging a workplace event. So similar to what Marijke explained about the 5-6 module, through researching the topic and from our work experience with different organizations, we agreed that in a real context, before planning new work-related events, such as training workshops or office parties, the planning team go over and evaluate past events to highlight what they did right and what didn't go so well. After this evaluation, the team starts planning for the upcoming event. So the first task for someone who's a member of the planning committee would be to participate in the meeting and listen to the event manager reporting and or evaluating the past event. So here, we set the listening skill as the first skill to be presented in the module. Near the end of this first meeting, the members of the planning committee are assigned roles to follow up with different aspects of the next event. In order to prepare for these assigned roles, the students will need to do research to find out how they can plan for this part. Therefore, we decided that reading should be the next skill of the module. In a real workplace context, committee members will gather for a second meeting and each will present the results of their research. For this reason, we chose speaking as the next activity. Speaking was also the culminating task here, as it is largely built on its listening and reading activities. The final skill was writing in this module. The main tasks were to write emails to the directors or managers to request funding for an event or explain how the event would benefit the team. It's back to you, Larry.
Yes, thanks very much, Sepideh, for that, and thank you for taking us through the process of fleshing out those real-world task goals. As we go down the module template, there is the next box is for background and context. This is the background information specific to the module that learners need to know in a real-world setting. This section includes aspects of the physical and social setting, cultural knowledge and information, and awareness of local practices. This information often answers the question is, why is this module important for students and why is it important to teach?
Well, those are important questions to ask for sure. For the 5-6 module, we describe the context as follows. Meetings, training opportunities, or events are common in most workplaces and volunteer organizations. Typically, invitations for these meetings are sent out by email, often with some kind of agenda or additional information attached. Newcomers might not be sure how to respond to these kinds of messages, or they might be unsure how to prepare for such an event. One might also need to communicate with colleagues to make arrangements to attend these kinds of meetings. What level of formality is expected, and how do you prioritize between the event and other responsibilities?
For the 7-8 module, this is how we describe the background or the context. Most medium and large-sized businesses in Canada will offer their employees free training, or they will throw a party once or twice a year. However, even smaller organizations will occasionally organize events and have their staff take a workshop or a course. It is important for newcomers to understand why the companies do this and how they plan for such events in their committee meetings.
Thank you, Sepideh. Moving on to the next role on the module template, are CLB descriptors. This is the point where you need to get your CLB document out and have it at the ready. These are the CLB descriptors that are specific to the task, and they are copied directly from the Canadian Language Benchmark document. These include the competency areas, competency statements, and specific indicators of ability related to the real-world task goals. It's not necessary to list every possible competency or indicator. Copy only the ones that directly relate to the task. Sometimes this analysis reveals real-world task goals that are not appropriate to the CLB level, or necessitates a rethink of the direction and scope of the model. Marijke, on to you.
Yes. Yes, the competencies and indicators certainly help you to zero in on the exact task. In the 5-6 module, we found that all of the real-world task goals fell under the interacting with others competency. So we copied from the CLBs what applied to these tasks. And you will notice, as Larry explained, that we didn't copy the full competency statement, but only what was explicable to the real-world task goal. So personal messages related to a familiar event at CLB 5, simple, at CLB 6, moderately complex, which is receiving an invitation. Then identify specific factual details and implied meanings, understanding what the event is about, and identifies the purpose of the message, understanding if the message is just to inform or if there's anything expected of the reader. Identify the reader-writer relationship is to understand, for example, if the sender is the employee's superior. Identifies mood and attitude of the writer to find out, the tone of the message. And at CLB 6 also identifies the context.
Right, so in our 7-8 module, the real world task for the reading skills were read a document with a checklist about event planning, review the purpose of the event and or the training program, and decide what arrangements need to be made for the next event. And for CLB 8, we had the added task of deciding which components or workshops would be useful for the next event. Accordingly, we decided to go with 2 competency areas for the reading skill in the 7-8 module as compared to the 5-6. We had competency area number 1, comprehending information, where the competency statements were understand moderately complex extended descriptions, interpret information contained in a moderately complex formatted text, such as a calendar, a table, a graph, or a diagram, and access, locate, and integrate several pieces of information from relevant online reference sources. For our second competency area, we chose getting things done, where the competency statements were find and use 3 or 4 pieces of information by scanning the text. And for CLB 8, we had find and integrate 3 or 4 pieces of information for comprehension and use.
So now, having completed the task analysis with the real-world task goals, context, CLB descriptors, the last step is to identify some assessment and skill-using tasks that can be completed in the classroom that relate to or simulate the real-world task goals identified at the beginning. This is the backwards planning or planning with the end in mind piece right here. Marijke?
Yeah, so using speaking as an example, the assessment task for this skill is a role play with the teacher to decline an invitation. Students receive 2 invitations to work-related events and pretend to call the host, who's played by their teacher, and decline the invitation. For one invitation, they speak to the host on the phone, and for the second invite, they leave a message on the host's voicemail. At CLB 6, students also apologize and provide reasons for declining the invitations. Sepideh, do you have an example for 7-8?
For sure. For the 7-8 module, I've chosen to show you the listening assessment task. In this assessment task, learners imagine they are taking part in a meeting at a construction company. They watch the slideshow presentation and listen to the discussion between the manager and the other members of the team. Learners take notes while they listen, and then they answer the comprehension questions.
So now that we have our formal assessment tasks, it's time to plan the skill-using tasks. Skill-using tasks are assessment for learning tasks that provide learners with an opportunity to practice what they have learned. They are a pre-planned part of the module with CLB-aligned criteria as the focus of learning. For productive skill using tasks, feedback focuses on elements that are particularly important for growth and improvement. The feedback is descriptive and non-evaluative. It is action-oriented, providing concrete strategies that focus on how learners can improve based on their current performance. The feedback may come from multiple sources, teachers, their self-assessment, or from peer assessment, and may be written or oral, may be given to individuals or to a group. Here's an example from today's featured module.
So following up on Larry's explanation about productive tasks, here is the example for speaking. The skill using task is the same but different from the assessment task. In this 5-6 module, the skill using task for speaking can be done as a role play between students. And instead of declining an invitation, students accept the invite to an event, workshop, or meeting. The invitations used in this task are also different from the invitations in the assessment. The skill using task is a good practice opportunity to see if students are able to complete the task independently. And the skill using task can be peer reviewed, but it is not graded, so students don't get an achieved or not achieved. The assessment task still is different and also a step up.
For receptive skill using tasks, they are marked by the teacher or a learner or a peer. Action-oriented feedback may be included on the task itself or discussed in small groups with the teacher as a class. When it comes to counting skill using tasks as artifacts to go into portfolios, it should be noted that while skill using tasks can go into student portfolios and can be counted as artifacts, if they are used as practice for formal assessment tasks, then only the formal assessment task can be counted as an artifact. We keep on saying that there's no double dipping here.
So the skill using receptive task in this 7-8 module is quite similar to the assessment task. Students imagine they are taking part in an event planning meeting at their company. They watch a presentation and listen to the manager and a team member talking about last year's party and asking for ideas for the next party. Students take notes while they listen, and when the presentation is over, they answer the comprehension question. So it's very similar to the assessment task in that regard.
So once we've determined the end goal, in other words, the assessment tasks, it's time to fill in the language focus items on the module template. So we're not finished the process yet. These are the items that learners will practice and which become the skill building activities that learners need to practice to successfully complete the assessment task. At this point, doing a task analysis will help you figure out the various components of each task or the language focus items, so that you can plan the skill building activities learners will need to practice before attempting the assessment. When doing the task analysis, be sure to consider the spectrum of elements that comprise communicative competence. In the Canadian language benchmarks, this is covered by the 4 knowledge areas. These areas serve as the underpinnings of the Canadian language benchmark document and contain the essential elements of language proficiency. These 4 elements are grammatical knowledge, which includes grammar, vocabulary, and pronunciation. Textual knowledge, which is the ability to connect words and sentences into cohesive and coherent texts or discourse. Functional knowledge, which involves understanding and using appropriate language for specific purposes such as requests, threats, suggestions, persuasion. And finally, sociolinguistic knowledge, which relates to understanding and using language that is appropriate for a given social context. In other words, using the correct level of formality, using idioms and figurative language, and so on. Task analysis is essential to uncover the elements that actually need to be covered in the skill building, so that the in-class skill building activities can be directed towards the task outcomes without detours into skill building that may be unnecessary or unrelated to the task goals. While task analysis is not always easy, it is essential, and it can sometimes change our understanding of which knowledge elements are truly central to completing the task. let's take a look at some of the skill building activities that are in today's featured modules.
Well, there certainly is a lot that you can include as skill building tasks. And I apologize for going to the next slide too quickly. So I would like to point out that in the modules that we develop, we try to refer to additional resources that could also be used for skill building, but that the tasks that are developed for the module relate directly to the real world task goals and therefore to the assessment tasks. In this module, the speaking and listening skills have a lot in common. Writing and speaking also have some overlap as they both assess accepting or declining an invitation. I remember that all of the real world task goals fall under the interacting with others competency. Therefore, you will see in this module that some of the skill building activities support more than one skill. Grammar practice is offered with vocabulary activities, such as the vocabulary cards and an online glossary. And also with some targeted activities about the passive voice, which is offered online, and a paper-based activity about using yet, still, and already, which can be done in class. In the writing skill building activity, responding to a workplace invitation by email, students learn phrases to accept, decline, or tentatively accept an invitation. And those phrases are then used again in the speaking task. This is an example of functional knowledge. We've included a speaking skill building task, basic telephone expressions. Students practice opening, maintaining, and closing a phone conversation appropriately. And this activity also helps them to recognize these phrases in the listening task. And this is an example of sociolinguistic knowledge. It also works the other way around. Listening to a conversation in the skill building various phone messages gives students an example of what their own conversations could be like. And this task can be done as an online SCORM activity.
In the 7-8 module, we also plan activities to cover different aspects of communicative competence. For grammatical knowledge, we included vocabulary activities and resources, such as glossaries, crossword puzzles, and cryptex activities. For additional practice, we added a skill building activity to consolidate students' knowledge of useful expressions for agreeing and disagreeing. We chose these expressions because there were several agreeing and disagreeing phrases used in the assessment task and the skill using activities. Let's see how we accounted for textual knowledge in the 7-8 module. For the writing assessment task, students were asked to write 2 to 3 paragraph emails. Here, it was not only important that they had the vocabulary, but also that they use the right paragraph structure. So we had to design an activity where they could practice their paragraph writing skills. In this in-class activity, students were asked to read a list of event planning ideas for an online training session and organize it into 2 paragraphs. To give even more practice with textual knowledge, we created an activity where learners were asked to imagine they were planning a Christmas party at their office. They had to read the prompt, which is a brief list of what has been decided by the planning committee, and write 2 paragraphs of their team, to their team lead. In one paragraph, they explain what they had decided and why, and in the second, they suggest how the upper management can support the plan. The activity is designed as a workshop activity, so students can read and review the work of their peers. As you see, this activity was designed not only to provide practice with functional knowledge, where the learners had to use appropriate sentence and paragraph structures, but also to provide a situation where learners could practice their sociolinguistic knowledge and demonstrate their ability to write a conventional email in a socially appropriate form. Now let's see how we plan to include activities to provide support for functional knowledge. To make sure students had ample practice with this aspect of the assessment task, we designed an activity where information was presented to them in the form of graphs. learners were asked to reduce and reproduce the information and convert it into paragraph format. Again, we designed this activity as a workshop activity so students can read and review the work of their peers.
Thank you for all of that, Sepideh. We're not finished quite yet. There is one additional box to look at, official row on the module template, that is language and learning strategies. These are language or learning strategies that learners might need to successfully complete the assessment task and therefore need to be incorporated into the skill building for the module. These strategies are related to strategic competence, the fifth component that forms the foundations of the Canadian language benchmarks. To give this some context, here are some examples of language and learning strategies. Please note that these need to be appropriate for the CLB level. They could be strategies for effective listening, asking for repetition or clarification as a strategy for avoiding miscommunication and misunderstandings, skimming a text for the general idea or scanning for specific facts, proofreading and editing their work. So now let's take a look at some language learning strategies that learners might need to successfully complete these assessment tasks in the module.
So although it is possible to have skill building activities dedicated to practicing language and learning strategies, in this module, they've been incorporated in the skill building tasks. I'll show you a reading activity, receiving an invitation. After practicing new vocabulary with this crossword puzzle, amongst others, students read 2 short email invitations and answer comprehension questions. The questions help them to use different reading strategies, such as reading for detail or using the context and their understanding of new vocabulary to answer the questions. Also, the skill using and assessment tasks are all followed by a self-assessment to help students reflect on their learning and the strategies they may have used to complete the task. How do you teach strategies at the 7-8 level, Sepideh?
Right, good question. Because as you mentioned, the elements of strategic competence are often embedded in other activities. However, in some modules, including the 7-8 module, we developed activities that were specifically designed to provide practice with learning strategies. For example, the activity Taking Effective Notes is designed so students can learn more about different techniques for taking notes and practice these techniques. The second activity you see on the slide, Searching for an Event Planning Checklist, is a reading skill building task, and it aims to provide learners with practice in searching the internet, skimming resources, identifying, selecting, and integrating relevant information from each, and ultimately creating their own checklist. As you see on this slide, there's a screenshot of this reading activity where learners are instructed to do an internet search on either Google or Bing and browse for ideas for different office events and parties. Back to you, Marijke.
Yes. So planning backwards from the assessment tasks to skill using and skill building tasks, we finally get to the start of the module. And the getting started materials include vocabulary practice, discussion questions, and often a culture note or a grammar note. All of these activities are meant to prime the pump, so to speak. They introduce students to the topic, help them to connect their own experience and knowledge to the real-world task goals that they are going to practice, and help them set their goals for this module. So strange as it may seem, these tasks are developed last in module development. What does that section look like in the 7-8 module?
So here is a screenshot of that section for the 7-8 module. So these include warm-up tasks that aim to create or activate the learner's background knowledge and prepare them for the module. In this section, there are 2 glossaries: a warm-up form activity that provides the learners with the opportunity to think and talk about their experiences with office events, and 3 activities aiming to improve the learner's grammatical knowledge. Each grammar activity is designed using a different tool like H5P, quiz, or forum activities, so learners get to practice what they learn in a variety of different ways. Wow, that brings us to the end of our overview of the module development process. Thank you very much, everyone, for your participation. We hope that we've given you an idea of what can be found in these two modules and sufficient background on how they were planned and developed. So we now open the floor for any questions that you might have. And I guess it's over to Paul. Were there any questions in the chat?
Thank you. No, it's a very quiet chat, I think, because it was such a well-prepared and comprehensive presentation. That was fantastic. Thank you very much for that. If anyone does have questions, now would be the great time for them. You can write them in the chat or unmute yourself if you would like to ask directly. First question from John Allen. What are the names of the 5, 6, and 7, 8 model modules?
So the 5, 6 module is preparing to attend a workplace event. And the 7, 8 module is arranging a workplace event.
I see lots of thank yous. Presentation was great. Thank you for the presentation. I think everyone really enjoyed that. Thank you all. Actually, again, that was marvelous.
You're very welcome.
Nancy's asking, is the template for designing a module available? I suppose you could take it from any one of the modules in the PBLA sample course and just type over it or convert it to Word document yourself. That would work.
Yeah.
And
you could also contact any one of us, I think, and we could help you out.
it's also available in the learning session. I think there's a new learning session, professional learning session that the CCLB is putting together on module planning, and both the module plan template and the module plan annotated template will be included in that. It should be coming out, I think, before the new year for sure. Those of you who went through the implementation packages with as a lead teacher or with you in your programs, I think it was likely 4.2 or 4.3. I can't remember the exact number, but it was in the original packages. So talk to your lead teachers; they should also have a copy of it kicking around if they haven't put it in, posted someplace that will be available to you.
Yeah, I know that most of the online modules that we're developing will have that module package in the teacher section. I'm not sure if there's Word files. In some of the modules, there might be a Word file. Most of them will have a PDF for sure.
Did anyone have any other questions? This is a great time. We've got 3 experts just waiting for your questions. Valerie says it was very thorough, and I agree. It really was.
I guess I would ask how are people doing with planning at module stage? It's something that now there are quite a few examples out there. Is it something that you've done, or something that you've always done, but you just haven't put it into that context, or is it something that you're thinking about? Does it feel kind of overwhelming, or does it feel like it's doable?
So I see a question from Janine, and she asks, are you teaching these modules online, blended, or in a face-to-face classroom? That's a really good question. So the modules that we develop, the PBLA modules for Avenue, the module packages have paper handouts, like a full package, and some of the activities are available both on paper and online, and some of the activities are only available as an online activity. We develop them in such a way that the skill using and assessment tasks always have both those options. But in essence, you know, if you wanted to teach it fully online, there might be a few activities that there's not an online component for.
Thank you. No, I was even thinking in terms of the amount of scaffolded tasks, because with coming from a classroom where we had 6 hours a day to be able to,
Wow.
you know, interact with our students, and now we're usually doing our formal Zoom for 2 hours.
Mhm.
So I can only give so much homework, otherwise the students won't do it. They're overwhelmed with it. So I'm looking at your modules and they're beautiful. They're beautiful. In terms of how I'm doing with the modules, my reality is that I have to minimize what I task my students to do.
Mhm.
So that's just an aside. I do really enjoy using the pieces that the CCLB, I think is the correct name, have prepared. Like I can pull pieces and use them in my classroom, and the students really like that whole SCORM thing, you know, where you click and you get the immediate response. You know, do I create modules in the depth that you've just demonstrated? Probably my honest answer is no, but I do believe that I have you know, effective teaching and good learning going on in my classrooms. But it's not as though what you're preparing is for naught, even if we don't use it in entirety, because it's very, very helpful to have those pieces available to us. So thank you.
Yeah. And I think you make a valid point, Janine, that, you know, every teacher's reality is different. And, you know, even if you only have that real world task and that assessment task at the end, the pieces in the middle are going to be different for every teacher, depending on what their students need. So, you know, our objective with developing these modules is also to give teachers lots of different choices. Why we add those additional resources and suggestions, because sometimes you might even look for more skill building activities than what we've provided.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
No, thank you very much.
Definitely the pivot to online learning has created a lot of challenges, and the amount of contact time you have with the students is been greatly diminished for sure. But I mean, it's great that you know, Avenue has started and has materials that are applicable to the blended learning environment, and that you know, hopefully the problem again too is with the classroom is, you know, how to make sure that you're on top of what students are doing and what they've accomplished, and, you know, really knowing where they are. So yeah, the times have been challenging in the last year and a half with COVID and all these changes for sure.
I can make an additional comment about the blended classroom because COVID happened. You know, we've become more aware of the need for good blended resources, and flipped classrooms is what we keep in mind. So we design activities in such a way, especially the skill building activities, that you can maybe start an activity in class, assign it for homework, and then follow up the next class with your, you know, when you have a video class or a face-to-face class. So there are definitely components that we design, whether it's on paper or online, that students can do independently. Well, if there's no further questions, Larry, Sepideh, do you guys have anything to add?
No, I think we covered the basics. I just wanted to add, if anyone has any questions, you have our emails. We can also add the emails in the chat. Please feel free to send an email, or you can also type your question in the Teachers Forum on Avenue, so we can respond to you there.
Absolutely. Well, I think that's it for me as well. Thank you everybody for joining us. And if you missed part of it, or if you want to review something that we talked about, the video will be made available on YouTube as well. Have a great day.